Good evening, everyone. I'll call this council planning meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. by recognizing the traditional keepers of this land and specifically our neighbors of the Alderville First Nation with a formal territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the municipality of Brighton is located on the Mississauga-Anishinaabe territory and is the traditional territory of the Mississauga. The Council of the Municipality of Brighton respectfully acknowledges that the Mississauga Nation are the collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. We'll move into the approval of the agenda with the motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that Council approve the July 20th, 2022 planning meeting agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion is carried. Members of council, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. Councillor Tadman.
Thank you, Mayor. To be consistent, as I've declared before, I will be declaring an 8.4. It's a family matter. I think it's 8.4. Oh, well, it's not that one. It's the Butler Creek one. Sorry.
Thank you. Anyone else? Brings us to delegations. Our first delegation is Mary Gibb, New Housing Developments and Incomplete Safety Infrastructure. Mrs. Gibb.
Mayor Ostrander, councillors and staff. I feel that no one should be living in new housing developments until all safety infrastructures are in place. There are two problems at the Proctor Park development. People have been living in the duplexes at Proctor Park Place since last November.
Videos off.
Just get you hang on while we fix a muting problem. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Two pieces of infrastructure that are needed for safety were not in place when the renters moved in. One is still missing. I always felt that even what was proposed for safety was grossly incomplete. If someone wanted to walk uptown, and I expect they rented this development because it was close to town, it would not be safe. The short sidewalk, only covering 3 lots, has not even been started. The crosswalk, with only a small sign that is proposed, located too close to the crosswalk, is also not there. If they wanted to walk on the sidewalk on the far side of the road, rather than on the road, it would be scary. In time, the number of seconds a person would have to go across Yonge Street at the exit from the west side to the east side of Yonge Street, 4 seconds. He didn't time the other way for obvious reasons. View of cars coming is even worse. The proposed sidewalk ends around Singleton. Many people will not even turn left off Singleton in a car because of the fast driving cars coming into town on Yonge Street. You realize that this development was advertised as a seniors complex. I have learned since I first wrote this that indeed the renters are walking down the bike lane to town, as well as fast cars. Large groups of bikers come to town in the summer and go around the curve at the development exit very fast. This does not seem like a good scene. Will they Will they all stop suddenly when they see a walker in the bike lane? Actually, even a single biker would have to move to the car lane in a hurry and might not have time to check for cars. This is my idea. Why don't we put a sidewalk in the bike lane, which is probably not a good spot in the first place? And it can go all the way down to Dorman Street and join the sidewalk there. It would solve a lot of problems and probably be a lot less expensive than the original plan. The second problem, the duplexes did not have a safe second exit from their home. The decks installed this spring finally have stairs, 6 months too late for safety. I hear, is it true that developers do not have to have these safety features in their new development for 4 months after the first person moves in? This in itself is ridiculous, but even that is not happening. Other new developments in town, Tolman, Cortland Way, Crispin Street, to name a few, that have been finished for a few years, still don't have all their safety features. I do not want to pay my taxes and have the money wasted on lawsuits. Finally, who is responsible for enforcing safety instructions in a new development? And who has the final responsibility for the safety of our citizens? I sent a copy of my letter to Paul Walsh, the CAO, the mayor, and all councillors. I heard back from 2 councillors, but still don't have an answer to my question.
Thank you, Mrs. Gibb. Are there any questions of the delegate this evening? Councillor LeBlanc?
Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs, for your presentation. Thank you, Mayor, for your presentation. Reading the one on the sidewalk that's going along the road and they're using the bike path. When I looked at the subdivision agreement, and I think the municipality was responsible to put that sidewalk in February, and it still hasn't been put in. And that's what it states in the subdivision agreement that I read, that I looked after I saw your correspondence. When it comes also for the other streets that you mentioned, they're in a particular subdivision. And yes, it's been over a year and they're tracking mud into their houses. And I was with Councillor Bateman, they invited us to go see the seniors home, and I asked them about their sidewalks. And they gave me a long-winded answer, but I guess that's in their subdivision and they're allowed to wait for that, to wait till multiple streets are done before they finish that street. They're not finished. Even though Coulter's finished, they got to wait till the rest of the streets are done on Royal Gala and everything before they can put the
Well,
sidewalks.
that might be years.
No, that's the way it reads. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Who's responsible for getting them in?
Right.
And I don't know, the developer.
The
It
developer.
is forgetting what in. Just let's be clear, we're talking about 2 different things. So who's responsible for getting,
For enforcing safety regulations.
well, it depends on the safety regulation. So our building inspector inspects to the Ontario Building Code and issues occupancy permits based on the allowability under the Ontario Building Code, whether you can occupy a building or not. And that, of course, is what our building inspectors govern to. With regard to the sidewalk on Yonge Street, Councillor Blanc is partially correct. The municipality is responsible to put in the sidewalk along Yonge Street and the crosswalk. The developer was to contribute, and I think has, 50% of a certain portion of that sidewalk. However, what people might not be aware of, there's significant municipal infrastructure in the way of being able to construct that sidewalk. So there's design work underway to move poles, hydrants, certain underground infrastructure. There's also a retaining wall that needs to be moved before that sidewalk can go in. So there's a lot of engineering and design work that needs to be done in advance of that sidewalk going in. Likely we won't see that sidewalk construction until next spring.
Well, why wasn't all that done first before they went into the houses?
Well, that work would not have been done in advance of people going into the houses. We don't tend to do infrastructure work before people show up? What if the developer didn't finish the complex? What if the developer didn't bother to build those houses at all? What if there was an entire change to the layout and design in advance? The municipality would not have gone down the road of putting in infrastructure without knowing for sure what was happening back there. So
Wouldn't it be simpler just to use the bike lane? They're using it now anyway.
maybe, but we're
sidewalk.
we're obligated to fulfill the conditions of the OMB appeal or whatever it was called, the LPAT appeal. Go ahead, Councillor Dadman.
Yeah, and you are correct in, as far as I've ever seen in the past, it's the different code for the occupancy of the home than the final finishing things like as you're talking now about sidewalks and things. And I know it doesn't always sound like it's safe, but there is a different standard for each step of the way to finish a concept like the one that you're talking about there.
Maybe they should change the standard.
I think you should.
The good news
need
is we do know about it and the design work is in progress and we will see that sidewalk constructed. It hasn't fallen off the radar.
Okay.
I do understand the frustration of how slow sometimes infrastructure work appears to happen, but it does
Yeah.
get done.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, a motion from Deputy Mayor Connect, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc, the council received the delegation from Mary Gibb regarding concerns of incomplete safety infrastructure and new housing development throughout Brighton. Is there any discussion? Councillor Bateman?
If I could just ask a question for clarification, because in the letter from Mrs. Gibb, it mentions the 4 months, so I'm not sure where that came from. So is it okay if the director lets us know, like, is that in a subdivision agreement typically, or is that in the Planning Act, or that doesn't even exist? I've never heard of a time frame. I just like clarification if there is.
You able to answer that question, Director?
I'm afraid not directly. If I can speak generally to it, there's oftentimes in a development agreement, in this case, a site plan control agreement, a construction timeframe. And but it's usually a question of expediency and not really a specific schedule, just because of the moving parts in any construction project that aren't normally just nailed down to a specific date. So, but no, I don't think that site plan control agreement refers specifically to 4 months.
So nothing based on when the owner or the tenant moves in, it's based on other.
That's right. Yeah, the site plan control agreement will give some direction as to what conditions need to be met prior to the issuance of the building permit. But then the building permit and the building code take over after that, as the mayor alluded to.
And in the case of the municipal infrastructure along Yonge Street, that's a municipal infrastructure project. And while we are obligated to get the work done, we have to do it on our best schedule. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Our best schedule and in accordance to the budget, and we're learning that the design, some of the existing infrastructure that's been discovered there is going to add some of the costs that might exceed the current budget a little bit. So there's always those considerations too.
Thank you. Anything further on the motion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Our second delegation is Joanne Falatico about 27 Price Street, Severance. Is Joanne with us?
Yes, I am.
Could we please get Joanne, just one moment, please, Joanne, we're going to get you pinned so we can, so we're not looking at ourselves. Are you able to turn your camera on?
Yeah, I'm trying here. Here we
There you
go.
go. Yeah, we can see you.
Great.
Okay, you have the floor.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak before you, especially on such short notice. I am here tonight representing the 21 people who make up 3 families working through the severance process. On August 18th, 2021, we met together very much like we are tonight. The application for granting a severance for 27 Price Street West was on the agenda with the goal of confirming the table of conditions for granting the severance. The conditions were agreed to, signed, and mailed out August 27th, 2021. The conditions have a one-year deadline for completion. This deadline is only a few weeks away. I understand that the conditions have all been met. This is as of today, and my lawyer has prepared and sent the deeds, etc., to you, and your lawyer is reviewing before the final approvals with a deadline of August 27th, 2022. So this leads us to the main area of concern before us, which is the cost sharing agreement for the water and sewer connections. At the council meeting on August 18th, 2021, we were given a cost of $6,500 for our portion of the works required for Lambton Street. This required a cost sharing agreement between the township and my family. When the agreement was presented to us, we noted the cost was not being shared equally, but with us paying a 65% share, and the cost had gone up from $6,500 to $19,284. That is almost triple the original cost quoted, and also included a new fire hydrant. So do you usually charge residents 65% of the cost of a fire hydrant? As I understand it, the township recently began the process for issuing an RFP for the works and found out they had underestimated the scope of the work. Your staff had questions they could not answer, and so they contacted my engineer for help. I am asking that the costs of that consultation be shared. I have serious concerns that any substantial change in the work to be done puts an unrealistic onus on us as long-time residents and may put the completion of our plan to tidy up the property and construct 3 new modest homes in jeopardy. Our plan is to spend more time living in Brighton. We seem to be the only ones being required to pay for community improvement. Other new homes in the area do not seem to be required to bear the cost of municipal upgrades. Perhaps the idea of building an upgraded water main at this time should be revisited. The old water main is functional and runs right along our property line on Lambton Street. I feel that a better option may be to simply connect us to the existing 50mm system. Other new builds on Price Street West did not require installing a whole new water main on Price Street West to move forward. Using scenario 1 from the cost sharing agreement, where we would be installing a 50mm water main instead of upgrading to a 150mm water main, would reduce the cost by approximately $10,000. Council has admitted that the water lines in this area are going to be upgraded anyway in the next couple of years. This would probably include upgrading everyone to 150mm water mains. We are already paying property taxes to cover expenses such as this. A better option may be to construct an upgraded water main for Lambton Street when the lines are being replaced on Price Street West and all the work can be done properly and consistently at one time. Perhaps this would eliminate some of the engineering difficulties. It was our understanding that we would only have to bear the costs of what any resident would have to pay in order to be connected to the water and sewer system. Our biggest fear right now is that we have demolished our homes because it was a condition for granting the severance. If the lots cannot be serviced with water and sewers at a reasonable cost, we are in a worse position than when we started. Mr. Mayor, at the meeting of August 18, 2021, you pointed out that we could revisit the matter of the cost to us if it became a financial burden. $19,248 is already a large sum. We do not have unlimited funds. 2 of the owners are retired and 1 is on disability benefits. We need this cost capped at a reasonable amount that any other resident would pay. All through this process, we have been referred to as developers. A developer would absorb these costs and pass them on to an eventual buyer. That is not the case here. We bear the burden of the cost sharing agreement. We cannot pass this on to someone else. Why are we the only residents in Gosport who cannot seem to affordably access the water and sewer system that we pay for through our water bill and property taxes? I do not know what the additional costs involved are, or if they are costs that the township is responsible for, or what it involves. I know that costs have gone up. We are all experiencing that every day. The longer this drags on, the more the costs go up. In conclusion, we are looking to council to decide what makes sense from a cost perspective and engineering perspective, and come up with a fair and equitable division of costs that does not cause us financial hardship. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Filatico. I'll open the floor for questions of clarification from members of council. Councillor Tadman.
Thank you. First of all, I think it needs to be noted, this isn't a development of one person developing 3 lots. These are 3 different families, as I understand, that are wanting to build new homes on those properties. And they've been paying water bills probably ever since the 60s or whenever that water went through down there. So right from the start, I never thought it was fair that they should have to pay for a water main along in front of their place. So I just wanted to make those 2 statements at this point.
Thank you. Anything else from any other member of council? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I was wondering if Mr. Walsh could tell us what's a normal connection charge to water for someone who's building on a new piece of property?
Director?
Do you know?
Yeah.
I'm asking what a connection charge normally is. I know I budgeted $20,000 when I built my house. I just want to know what it is, actually is.
I'm afraid I don't know that answer offhand. Our manager of environmental services normally do that at the time of billing permit, and it gets circulated accordingly. And I don't think we have a separate, well, we do have a separate connection charge, but maybe not in the same sense that you're describing. But what that cost is, I'd have to refer back to the manager. I can find that out for council.
If you would,
Email
that would be
council.
good. Thank you. Councillor LeBlanc?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. To the Director of Public Works, I remember voting on this, and Mr. Josh was here, and we asked to make sure when they came up that the new water line was going to be put in, and yes. And the estimated cost at that time was $6,500. And now the estimated cost, I don't know, but her portion would be over 19, close to 20,000. And I know that the costs have gone up lately, but in building costs and stuff, I don't know what it is. They say it's 25%. So 25% of 6,500 is not 19,000. So one of the things that I've asked in council fair, when they do estimation of job, do they have CPM training and critical path so they can do these estimates? Because they usually do it per linear meter, like $300 per linear meter, $400 per linear meter when they're replacing sewer and water and stuff. And just wondering, was there something found in the engineering study or something that brought these costs up?
Mr. Walsh?
In response to the question, there's a couple of design issues that came up. There was a gas line that was discovered in the vicinity of where that extension would be put. So there's some clearances that need to be done that weren't anticipated originally. Engineering costs have gone up quite a bit, as you've alluded to. They go up, I'm hearing, weekly. And so I think it might exceed that 25%. Also, we don't know the actual cost. There is an RFQ being put out for it. And that's going to be put out next week. So at the end of that RFQ, we'll actually know the actual costs. So I think that what we're working with is just best estimates at this time. So those numbers are still outstanding. The idea here originally, when that site plan or when the development agreement was approved as part of the consent applications, was that there was some public benefit to the extension, given that we could upsize some of the water main. And so the thought was, you know, if the public is benefiting, the public can share in those costs. Because there's need for a fire hydrant there is a minimum standard. That minimum standard is the 150 millimeters. So we do have to go with 150 millimeters if we get a fire hydrant. But not to expand the scope of the question asked of me, but if it is of interest to council that we revisit the cost sharing and the costs themselves and see how they better lie, then we can do that. And it would mean a different development agreement. The applicant has indicated that the conditions are met. They are met. The deeds of transfer are the only thing that we really needed, and the couple other very quick paperwork things, and we're done. So there's no concern about lapsing here. So we can get updated costing for an updated agreement if it's relevant, if it's beneficial. So we'll know better when that RFQ is completed and have some.
Thank you, Director. So I just want to be clear that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed from a timeline point of view, and the applicant, the homeowner, the undeveloper, if you will, doesn't have to worry about anything lapsing.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. That brings me to a question here about in the same paragraph where it talks about the cost of $6,500 going to $10,000. It says, after everyone consulted with my engineer, everyone, at the cost of the non-developer, the cost went up to $17,000. So, and that's a good point. Now, who's authorized or who approved that another engineer could be brought in, or is that something we had asked for too, that we wanted to consult with their own engineer? So are we part of that, or is this something that was done on their own?
Director?
Yeah, usually it's the applicant or the developer, in general, I use that in a generic sense, submits a design. So as part of the development agreement, we would have asked for a design from the proponent or the developer. And then our staff would review that. If need, we would peer review it, but something as small as this, we wouldn't normally peer review it.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I do understand the difficulty when our rules are made for developers. And when an individual does it, it's a lot harder to understand or to take that or to figure out how to pay for that. So I do get it. So if doing this upgrade means that we need a fire hydrant, is that cost partially borne by that person as well? Or, I mean, a fire hydrant benefits the municipality, I would think, more so than the person living there. I mean, is there leeway in some of this stuff, I guess, that we can maybe come up with a little bit better of an agreement?
Director?
Well, you can read my thought bubble there. A fire hydrant is good for about 45 meters away. So there would be other people benefiting from that. I'd have to take a look at the agreement and see how the costing of that hydrant was broken down. And I agree with the suggestion that hydrant should be a borne cost or shared cost, or maybe even a public cost.
So before I go to anyone else, we're not really under the procedure bylaw direct staff coming out of a delegation, but in a very quick sidebar with the clerk, the recommendation is that we would add and refer the information from the delegation back to staff for cost sharing consideration, and let staff and the property owners discuss what those look like, knowing that this property owner might reach out to all of us if she in fact doesn't like the answer that she gets from staff. So we could anticipate that staff will work hard on our behalf. Are there still questions out there, Councillor Rowley?
Well, I just want to echo what you said there. As the director said, we're close to getting the quotes for the RFP. And I think that at that point too, the staff should sit down with the homeowner. And I think we have to come up with a better cost sharing agreement here. Look forward to seeing that.
Thank you. Councillor Bateman?
No, I'm good now.
Thank you. Councillor Tadman?
Well, I think the most important thing tonight that you've got the reassurance, Joanne, that you're not going to be held up with moving forward, that you've met all the agreements so far. So you've got lots of time now.
Yes, thank you very much for that.
Anyone else before I ask the mover and seconder if they're okay with the change? As the mover, Councillor Tadman, I haven't read or did I read the motion? Did I read the motion? No, I haven't read the motion yet. I just read the change. So I'm going to read I'm going to read the change into your motion if you're okay with that. Councillor Bateman, you're okay with that as a seconder on
Yes.
this? So the motion reads, or will read, moved by Councillor Tadman, seconded by Councillor Bateman, the council received the delegation from Joanne Filatico regarding severance of 27 Price Street and refer the information for the delegation back to staff for cost sharing considerations. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Joanne, you can anticipate that someone from the planning department will be in touch.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And council, please be patient while I write this in. Okay, so that brings us to our statutory public meeting. The motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc. The council move into the statutory public meeting, July 20th, 2022 at 7:02 p.m. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Municipality of Brighton takes steps beyond the requirement of the Planning Act to engage the community in land use planning initiatives. The municipality also holds a statutory public meeting on the planning application and then receives a staff report with a recommendation on which council will make a decision. After council has made our decision, any person or public body may appeal council's decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal as long as they have made an oral submission at this meeting or provided comments in writing to the clerk's office and requested notice of the decision from the clerk's office. This is also true of any person or public body that wishes to participate in the appeal. For details or information on appealing decisions of council, please visit the municipal website or contact the clerk's office. The first item in our statutory public meeting this evening is consent and rezoning application files B08 2022, B09 2022, and Z05 2022, the location being 433 Scriver Road. Mrs. Deck, by what method and on what date was notice of the consent and zoning bylaw amendment applications given?
Notice of the consent and zoning bylaw amendment application was sent by first class mail on June 28th, 2022 to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. Notice was also circulated to all the agencies as required under the Planning Act. In addition, a signed notice was also posted on the property.
Thank you, Mrs. Deck. Would you please explain the purpose and reason for the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendments?
The purpose of consent application file number B08 2022 is to sever the property to create a new residential lot for a single detached dwelling. The proposed severed land, Severance A, will have a lot area of approximately 2.71 acres with a frontage of 60.2 meters on Scriver Road. The purpose of consent application file number B09 2022 is to sever the property to also create a new residential lot for a single detached dwelling. The proposed severed land, Severance B, will have a lot area of approximately 2.71 acres with a frontage of 60.2 meters on Scriver Road. The purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application file number Z05 2022 serves to rezone both the severed lots of applications B08 2022 and B09 2022 from rural zone to rural residential zone in order to address the reduced lot sizes and associated permitted uses. The purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application file number Z05 2022 also serves to rezone the natural heritage features identified in the environmental impact statement from the rural zone to environmental protection zone to ensure the natural features are protected. The retained lands from consent application number file numbers B08 2022 and B09 2022 will continue to meet or exceed the standards of the rural zone, environmental protection zone, and flood-prone area zone.
Thank you, Mrs. Deck. Are there persons present or coming in through Zoom who have any questions or comments regarding this evening's proposed consent and or zoning bylaw amendments? Please state your name for the record. Oh, yeah. Oh, we'll have to switch out a microphone here for you. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and fellow council members. My name is Catherine Tran. I'm a planner at RFA Planning Consultants, and I'm the agent on file. I have reviewed the staff report and concur with the staff's recommendations, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have, if any. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tran. We appreciate that. I am going to ask if there are other persons present who wish to make comments or have questions. And is there someone chiming in? Greg? He's muted. Oh, there we go.
Yes, no, I'm just a co-owner. I'm just listening in. Thank you very much. I have no questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If there's anyone else coming in through electronic conference technology, please unmute yourselves and ask your question or make your comment. Doesn't appear so. Ms. Tran, do you have any comments before I move on to council? Thank you. Are there any members of council who have questions or comments with regard to the consent and zoning bylaw amendments? There are none noted. Mrs. Deck, do you have any final comments?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Does council wish to make a decision this evening? With that, I have a motion moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Anderson, that council receives this staff report regarding consent applications B08 2022, B09 2022, and zoning bylaw amendment application Z05 2022 for 433 Scriver Road, as prepared by staff of the Planning and Development Department, and that council enacts a bylaw to rezone certain lands located in part of Lot 28 Concession 1 as in CL 49612, except 38R 866 and parts 1 and 2 on registered plan 39R 1124 from rural zone to the rural residential zone and the environmental protection zone. And the council direct the mayor and clerk to execute the development agreement provided in attachment 4. And the council enact a bylaw authorizing the mayor and the clerk to sign the development agreement. And the council authorized the municipal solicitor through an acknowledgement and direction agreement to register the enacted bylaw for the development agreement, including making any necessary revisions to legal descriptions, names, or undertakings as may be necessary. And further, that council grant provisional consent to application B08 2022 and B09 2022, subject to the following conditions. Each condition shall be fulfilled no later than 2 years from the date of the mailing of the decision. The application for the zoning bylaw amendment Z05 2022 is finally approved. That the applicant shall lay out and dedicate by deed to the municipality of Brighton a strip of land being a minimum of 10 meters from the center line of Scriver Road for road widening purposes along the frontage of both the new parcels and the retained portions to the satisfaction of the manager of operations. That cash in lieu of parkland in the amount of $1,000 be paid to the municipality of Brighton. That applications for entrance permits for the severed lots are submitted and approved by the municipality. That a preliminary grading and drainage plan is submitted to the satisfaction of the municipality for each of the severed lots, inclusive of any drainage easements if required. The applicant enter into a consent development agreement with the municipality that implements the conclusions and recommendations of the environmental impact study as accepted by the Lower Trent Conservation Authority and the municipality of Brighton. That GIS shape files of all field verified wetlands are provided to the Lower Trent Conservation and the municipality of Brighton to ensure regulatory mapping can be appropriately updated. That all taxes on each of the lots be in compliance with the municipal requirements prior to the issuance of a certificate of official. That a digital copy of a registrable survey for those lots and the appropriate deed transfer be prepared and deposited with the municipal clerk. That geospatial data of the surveyed parcel fabric with respect to the severed and retained lands shall be submitted to the satisfaction of the municipality. that the owner provides to the municipality a registrable description on deed conveying severed lands for use for the issuance of a certificate of official for consent. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Yeah, and they don't get shorter as the night goes on either. Yeah. That brings us to our next item in the statutory public meeting, being consent and rezoning application files B28 2021, B29 2021, B30 2021, and Z18 2021. The owner being Andrew Hunt at 314 Whites Road. Mrs. Deck, by what method and on what date was notice of the consent and zoning bylaw amendment applications given?
Notice of the consent and zoning bylaw amendment application was sent by first class mail on June 28th, 2022 to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. Notice was also circulated to all the agencies as required under the Planning Act. In addition, a sign notice was also posted on the property.
Thank you, Mrs. Deck. And would you please explain the purpose and reason for the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendments?
The purpose of consent application B28 2021 is to sever the property located at 314 Whites Road to create a new residential lot for a single detached dwelling. The proposed severed lands, Lot 2, will have a lot area of approximately 0.95 acres with a frontage of 56.62 meters on Whites Road. The purpose of consent application B29 2021 is to sever the property located at 314 Whites Road to again create a new residential lot for a single detached dwelling. The proposed severed lands, Lot 1, will have a lot area of approximately 1 acre with a frontage of 45.11 meters on Whites Road. The purpose of consent application B30 2021 is to sever the property located at 314 Whites Road to lastly create a new residential lot for a single detached dwelling. The proposed severed lands, Lot 3, will have a lot area of approximately 0.99 acres with a frontage of 68.88 meters on Whites Road. The purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application file number Z18 2021 serves to rezone the severed lots of B28 2021, B29 2021, and B30 2021 from extractive industrial exception number 6 EM6 zone to rural residential zone in order to address the associated permitted uses. The zoning bylaw amendment application also serves to rezone a portion of the lands created as part of consent application file number B30 2021 from extractive industrial exception number 6 zone to open space zone to separate the residential uses on the lot from forming a common contiguous boundary with adjacent residential lots. This would address specific guidelines in the minimum distance separation guidelines of the province. Regarding the retained lands, the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment application will serve to rezone from the current extractive industrial exception number 6 zone to the rural zone and environmental protection to recognize the use as established in the recent official plan amendment to permit residential uses and protect the natural heritage features identified on the property. Planning staff received 2 letters of opposition after the staff report was submitted from a neighboring property owner of the subject site and the Northumberland Federation of Agriculture. A copy of the correspondences has been distributed to council. Issues identified in the opposition letters outline concerns regarding the notice, rural development in general, and the application of minimum distance separation, MDS. Planning staff have reviewed the concerns and can provide the following comments. The subject property was previously utilized as a former aggregate pit and redesignated from aggregate resource to rural in 2021 through an approved official plan amendment. As the subject property is no longer used for aggregate extraction, the proposed rezoning application Z18 2021 will reflect the use as established in the OPA. Planning staff worked in conjunction with the applicant to ensure the proposed severances would not adversely affect the existing agricultural uses through the MDS review process as the rezoning results in a type A land use. The type A land use also allows for future expansions of any poultry operations to occur without increased setbacks that would have originated as part of a type B land use. The proposed severances allow the current poultry operation to continue and allows for future growth and expansion of the adjacent livestock operations.
Thank you, Mrs. Deck. Are there persons present who have questions or comments regarding the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendment? It's just anyone, according to these notes. Nobody on Zoom? Okay. Are there any questions or comments regarding the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendment from members of council? Councilor LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mayor. I've walked this property. This is the third time I've walked it. And the last time was for the last consent. And I read the letter that it's farmland. I don't see it being farmed or used at all. The problem that I do have is that we're going to use the weapon of farmland. So this is farmland, don't develop it. But it should be used in the right content and the right time. This is not the right time. I agree with not developing farmland 100%. But the thing is, there's never been any lots severed. They're allowed 3 or 4. And this is not farmable. It's a pit on the other side. A record of site conditions been done. They went to the MOE. They done everything that they were supposed to do to get here.
Just
But-
to be clear, Councilor LeBlanc, the issue is not that it's farmland. That's not the issue. The issue is that the neighbor is a farm and
I
it's
agree.
the MDS separation
I agree.
from the farming buildings. That's the concern that's being brought by the neighbor and by the Northumberland Federation of Agriculture.
Yes.
Right.
And also this one here, that they don't want farmland rezoned. I agree with
Right.
them 100%.
Absolutely.
This is not usable farmland.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Tadman.
At least I am pretty sure that this came in today, and up until I got this, I had no question about, going ahead, because I thought that this was all looked after and they met all their conditions. But I'm just wondering, Mayor and Council, if we should at least honor this letter and any concerns and defer it so that staff can go back and I want to be convinced that the actual distances are correct. Because we got
Thank you.
two different opinions on this.
Yeah,
So,
and in my conversation with Mr. Walsh today, that was his recommendation to
Okay.
me that we should likely defer this so that staff can have a conversation with the representatives from the NFA. And I believe Mr. Walsh alerted Mr. Hunt that was going to be the recommendation
okay,
for tonight.
so I would move that just so that.
Well, let's get through the statutory public meeting so that we don't have an
Well,
appealable
you
issue
know me, I
on
like
a
to get ahead here.
technicality. But I'll make sure you move that. Don't worry. There you go. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Mrs. Deck, any final comments?
Just like you said, Mayor, staff would like to defer this application so we have an opportunity to review with the 2 letters of opposition so that we can bring back an application in the next planning meeting.
Thank you. So I would normally ask if council wants to make a decision, but if I'm reading the room, council would like to defer this item until staff can have a conversation with the NFA. Is that fair? Councilor Rowley?
And as you said, the owner is also in agreement with this. Is this going to delay a whole process for you though? Like, are we going to bring it back soon?
I don't think the owner's in agreement.
No, I know.
I think
know,
he'd
but
like
I
us
mean,
to move
you
forward.
understand what's going on. Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Hunt, would you mind taking the microphone? Thank you. And we know who you are, but could you state your name for the record?
Yes,
Thank you.
and Andrew Hunt, I'm the owner of the property. Thank you, Mayor and
Thank
Council.
you.
Yeah, I'm all for delaying it. The only concern would be is this has been going on for 3.5 years. So I guess I would ask, like, what is the next timeline to delay? And I also feel like based on the group that continues to have the opposition, it doesn't really matter what we come back with. They're going to oppose it again, in my opinion. So if they keep coming back with letters each time, does that just will always be delayed? Like,
So I think the opportunity here is to have a conversation with the Northumberland Federation of Agriculture, their reps, and perhaps the neighbor. Bring it back to the next meeting in August. Help me out with the date. Is that the 4th, the 24th of August.
Okay, that's fair.
What we don't want to do is create an appealable situation where we're taking up more time and energy from both a municipal staff point of view and your point of view, trying to defend an appeal that could take you out another year or more.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
So if we can sort of get all those ducks in a row, proverbial ducks in a row for you and for the municipality, then theoretically, we'll be able to move forward on the 24th, and
Okay.
so too will you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Councillor Tabman, are you moving this deferral motion? Councillor Rowley, did I hear you wanted to second that? I thought maybe you did. Moved by Councillor Tabman, seconded by Councillor Rowley, the council defer consent and rezoning for 314 Whites Road. I'm just going to put to the August planning meeting. Any discussion? All in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. That brings us to our third and final item in the statutory public meeting this evening, being 85 Ontario Street, 95 Ontario Street, 97 Ontario Street. The applicants Van Vark Electric Limited and Daniel Simpson. Files are B12 2022, B13 2022, and Z09 2022. Mrs. Deck, by what method and on what date was notice of the consent and zoning bylaw amendment applications given?
Notice of the consent and zoning bylaw amendment application was sent by first-class mail on June 28th, 2022 to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. Notice was also circulated to all the agencies as required under the Planning Act. In addition, a sign notice was also posted on the property.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Deck. Would you please explain the purpose and reason for the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendments?
The purpose of consent application file number B12 2022 is to sever a 2-meter wide strip along the entirety of the north property line of 97 Ontario Street, approximately 378 square meters or 0.09 acres in total area, and add it to the existing residential properties north of the subject site located at 85 and 95 Ontario Street. The purpose of the lot addition is to address an existing encroachment and to provide improved access to an existing water service that runs along the entirety of the south property line of 85 and 95 Ontario Street. A swale is proposed within this 2-meter wide strip to support appropriate drainage of the development at 97 Ontario Street. The purpose of consent application file number B13 2022 is to create an easement to allow the owner of the subject property at 97 Ontario Street to access the proposed swale for construction and maintenance purposes. The purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application file number Z09 2022 serves to rezone the subject lands at 97 Ontario Street from urban residential 1 or the R1 zone and future development FD zone to urban residential 4 exception number 3 R4-3 zone to permit a reduced lot frontage, a reduced minimum rear yard setback, and to permit the row house development. The purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application file number Z09 2022 also serves to rezone the lot addition of B12 2022 from urban residential 1 zone and future development zone to urban residential 3 R3 zone in order to ensure consistent zoning across the benefiting properties.
Thank you, Mrs. Deck. Are there persons present or joining us by Zoom who have questions or comments regarding the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendment?
Yes, good evening and thank you. My name is Jennifer Wood. I'm a planner with FO10 Planning and Design. I'm here this evening representing the applicants. I have prepared a presentation summarizing and providing an overview of the development if council would find that helpful.
Council would find that helpful, so we'll proceed.
And good evening as well to those joining remotely. Thank you for being here. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so again, I'm here representing the owners and applicants. So that's Van Bark Electric Limited and also Daniel Simpson. So Daniel Simpson is the owner of the lands to the north, who we're doing the lot addition and easement with. So the applications relate to 85 and 95 Ontario Street, which is the portion of Mr. Simpson's property. And then 97 Ontario Street is owned by the Van Barks, which is really the crux of the development proposal and the rezoning. And the purpose of these applications is to permit the development of 14 bungalow townhouses. Next slide, please. So the property is located on the east side of Ontario Street, which is an arterial road that provides access, of course, both to Main Street to the north and down to Lake Ontario to the south. The property is primarily surrounded by low-density residential uses, and it's about 1 kilometer away from the downtown core, which really provides this site with good access to various services and amenities. Next slide, please. The site is 0.61 hectares, so that's about 1.5 acres. It's currently vacant and has 18 meters of frontage on Ontario Street. So you can see right now it's already a fairly irregularly shaped lot, a kind of a flag shape or extended hockey stick shape. And this image and aerial gives you a bit better of a sense of the immediately surrounding uses. To the north is residential, so for the most part, mobile homes. To the east is vacant land, and beyond that, environmental protection areas associated with Butler Creek. To the south is low density residential, mainly raised bungalow, single detached dwellings. And then to the west is Ontario Street, of course, and to the west of that, primarily single detached dwellings, both 1 and 2 stories in height. Next slide, please. So the intent of this application or these applications is to develop the property with a low density residential development that will both meet the intensification goals of our planning policy documents while also achieving compatibility with that low density residential character I just described. So with this goal in mind, the applicant is proposing to develop this site with 14 bungalow townhouses. There are a number of reasons why this particular built form and density were selected. Number one, it will contribute to Brighton's rental housing stock and help accommodate the growing population. So the intent is that these townhouses will be maintained in single ownership on 1 lot by the Van Barks and rented out. It will integrate a compatible built form on a vacant parcel surrounded by other low density residential development. This proposed bungalow architecture allows for residents with a wider array of mobility needs. This is slab on grade 1-story bungalow. And the development will provide future residents with many of the amenities that sort of a single detached dwelling would offer, but with less square footage and maintenance. Next slide, please. So here are some further details on what's being proposed. Again, there are 14 townhouse bungalows that are split into 3 separate blocks so that we don't have one continuous wall of dwellings. So there's 2 blocks of 5 units and 1 block of 4 units. These dwellings will be accessed by a private lane that connects to Ontario Street. So this is sort of not your standard wide municipal road. This wouldn't be conveyed to the municipality for eventual ownership and maintenance. It would be maintained in private ownership, owned by the Van Barks, maintained by the Van Barks. Essentially, it's a private drive that would provide access to all 14 of the units. Each unit will have 2 parking spaces. One will be in an attached garage and one within a surface parking spot in front of the garage. And we've also provided for 5 visitor parking spaces. Knowing Ontario Street isn't ideal for on-street parking for visitors, we've provided for that on site. Each unit will have sort of a traditional front yard landscaped area next to their parking spaces, and then your traditional sort of 6-meter rear yard private amenity space. What this plan also sort of faintly shows, which Mrs. Deck alluded to already, is a 2-meter wide strip of land that along the north side of the property that's proposed to be conveyed to Mr. Simpson, the owner of the lands to the north. As mentioned previously, there's a water service main that provides water to the rear of those existing mobile homes to the north. So a little bit unique. Usually it's within the road and comes in the front. This water service is behind these dwellings. And when it was installed, it essentially straddled the property line and in some places actually came in a little bit onto 97. So the two owners kind of worked together and agreed to transfer a strip or sell a strip to the property to the north to allow all of that service to be located wholly on the property to the north. And we've submitted consent applications to address that. Next slide, please. So these are some preliminary renderings to provide sense of the look and the feel and the scale of the townhouses that are being proposed. And what you can see here is a very conscious effort through the building's design to maintain a low rise height and feel. So these townhouses, they'll be slab on grade, which will make them very accessible, resulting in a relatively low first floor height. As well, you can see the roof lines have provided a fairly low pitch to further reduce that perceived height and scale. These will be relatively small, really maintainable units. They're 1 bedroom plus a flex space for like a den or office space and one bathroom. So in total, this development would have 14 bedrooms. Next slide, please. So the official plan, of course, provides a vision and the principles and policies for how Brighton envisions developing and growing over a 20-year planning horizon. Any application for zoning bylaw amendment has to demonstrate conformity with official plan policy. Schedule A is the schedule that identifies land use designations, so directing which permitted uses are permitted where. This property is within the residential designation, which is the yellow area. And the residential designation, it permits a pretty wide range of unit typologies and densities, single detached, semi-detached, multi-unit, for example, townhouses, apartment buildings, residential care facilities, and also residential units within a mixed-use building. The official plan goes on to categorize residential development in 3 categories, that being low, medium, and high density. And Schedule H to the official plan is a bit of a guide as to where we'd like to see low, medium, and high density. Next slide, please. And it does that by, in Schedule H, illustrating 3 districts, that being the urban, the central, and the core area district. So the yellow area is the urban district, that's the outer ring. It's intended to accommodate lower density development up to 30 units per net hectare. The orange area is the central district. This is meant to accommodate more low to medium density residential in the 30 to 60 unit per net hectare range. And then the core area district, which is the town center, is meant to accommodate medium to high density residential with a range of 60 to 100 units per net hectare. As I've outlined the property here in blue, you can see it's clearly within the urban area district, meant for low density, up to 30 units per hectare. 14 units on this site is well within that density at 23 units per net hectare. Next slide, please. So just to provide a brief overview of the 2 consents that are also being presented this evening. That's to facilitate a lot addition to allow Mr. Simpson's water service to be fully within his property. So that will be one consent, and the second consent to establish an easement over that 2-meter strip simply to help manage access to those underground services. And then this strip is also important to note is part of the rezoning in order to ensure that the new zone boundaries reflect or zone boundaries reflect these new lot lines, and we don't have a funny strip of one zone within another property. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the existing zoning that applies to the lands. And as you can see, just looking at the surrounding context, there's a mix of zones that are in this area, the various residential zones, including R1, R2, R3. There's a local commercial zone nearby. There are a few future development zones. This property is dual zoned or has two zones on it. There's a small portion by Ontario Street that's the R1 zone. And then the balance of it, and the majority of the property is within the future development zone. And the FD zone is really only permits existing uses. It's sort of like a holding type zone, which is intended to be rezoned in the future at such time as a development is brought forward. And at that time, an applicant is kind of required to demonstrate an appropriate development and zoning for that property. It's sort of the zone that we apply to urban lands that aren't yet developed that need to be rezoned. So all that to say, a zoning bylaw amendment would be required to permit any development on this land. Next slide, please. So in order to permit the townhouse development, a zoning bylaw amendment is required. So the application would rezone the majority of this site from the R1 and that FD zone, so the blue and the yellow area, to a special exception R4 zone. That is to allow the row house dwellings. The R4 zone is the only zone in the bylaw that permits that form of development, row house dwellings. And then the 2 meter strip to be transferred would also be rezoned from R1 to R3 and R3 FD to R3. So that's the green and the orange areas, simply to ensure once those lands are transferred to Mr. Simpson, they become part of the same zone that applies to the balance of his lands. Next slide, please. So when we say special exception R4, you might be wondering what that special exception is. We're not simply proposing to apply the standard R4 zone. We are seeking relief from 2 provisions from that zone, and those are minimum lot frontage and minimum rear yard. So the existing frontage of the property is 18 meters. So no matter how we slice it, we're already deficient just based on the existing parcel fabric. The required frontage is 30 meters. The existing frontage is 18, but because we're transferring that strip, the resulting frontage will be 16 meters. And really the purpose of that minimum frontage requirement is to provide sufficient width for safe access and entrance and turning movements. Because we're not proposing a municipal right-of-way that's typically 18, 20, 22 meters wide, but a narrower private lane, we have plenty of room within that 16-meter frontage to provide safe access, entrance and exit lanes, some room for greenery, as well as new utilities that will be brought into the site to service the individual units. The second provision we're seeking relief from is the minimum rear yard from 6 meters to 4.5 meters. This is more of a technical amendment. So for this property, the defined rear lot line is the east lot line, which is the red line I've highlighted on this slide. While this is the defined rear lot line, because it's opposite of Ontario Street, it does in fact function as a side lot line. So the proposed setback is 4.5 meters from this lot line, which would exceed the minimum side yard requirement if this were to be defined as a side yard. The proposed functional rear yard, so those yards behind the row house dwellings, is proposed to be 6 meters. That's the defined interior side lot line. So had that been the defined rear lot line, that would be met. All the other provisions of the R4 zone are being met: front yard, interior side yard, coverage, parking, landscaped open space, and height. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and the consents would permit the development of a low-density residential development consisting of 14 one-bedroom townhouse dwellings. The proposal, as summarized in the planning justification report submitted, is consistent with the provincial policy statement in the official plan. The proposed use and form are compatible with the surrounding areas, particularly given the setbacks proposed and that the height is equal to or less than that of typical heights in the surrounding area. And based on the proximity to the downtown core and location along an existing arterial road, this makes for a strong candidate for gentle intensification and infill project. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm also joined tonight by Brian Keane, who's a civil engineer with Jewel, who has been part of the detailed design of this site, including servicing and drainage and stormwater, if there are any questions in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually need to make sure we don't have any other citizens who want to go first. So I will ask again, thank you, Ms. Wood. Are there any other persons present or joining us by Zoom who have questions or comments regarding the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendment? Mr. Badgley, are you joining us for this purpose?
I'm just watching, thanks.
You're welcome. Glad we could entertain you this evening. Anyone else who wishes to make a comment? Members of council, questions or comments with regard to the proposed zoning and consent applications? Councillor Bateman.
Just a question on the roadway. You said the roadway is going to be narrow with the private laneway, and that's how you achieve some of the frontage. My only question, I just wanted to ask if the fire chief was part of this process, just for emergency services. Are they okay with the narrow roadway? I don't know if they weighed in on it or not.
Mr. Walsh?
They'd have to turn around. Just whatever they said about it would be good.
Yeah, the fire chief was involved in a development review team discussions on the concept plan. So there's been opportunity for the fire chief to comment on that. And there'll be further opportunity for the fire chief to comment at the time of a site plan control agreement approval.
Thank you. Anyone else from council? Go ahead, Councillor Tadman.
Thank you, Mayor. It was my understanding that these are all going to be rentals.
That's correct.
And one bedroom. So it could be very good for, well, we'll say a bit older people who want to give up a lot of the work in the yard. So that would be a good way for them to have less upkeep and yet have a place close to town. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else from council? There it is. First applicant right there. Councillor Anderson.
I was just looking for the square footage of each unit. I didn't catch anybody have that information.
Right now, we're just doing zoning and
Because it's 14 years, I just wanted to.
So it's conceptual. Do you want to weigh in on that? I think until we get to site plan control, we can't really ask the applicant to comment on that until they're ready to provide that.
I won't ask.
The site plan control will or will not come to council, or is that delegated now?
Fairly recently, as per Bill 109, site plan control has been delegated to staff and specifically the development review team.
But staff have intent to provide council with a report on those decisions that are made through delegated authority. So we'll get that information.
That's correct. There'll be a table of site plan control approvals.
Thank you. So you could ask when that report comes forward at that point, Councillor Anderson. Anyone else from council? Mrs. Deck, do you have any final comments?
Just to note that we're not making a decision this evening. It's just to receive public and council comments, and then we'll be coming back for a decision at a subsequent council meeting.
Thank you. So council, I won't ask if you want to make a decision, since we will simply receive the information through a motion moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Tadman. The council receives a staff report regarding consent application B12 2022 and B13 2022 and zoning bylaw amendment file number Z09 2022 regarding 85 Ontario Street, 95 Ontario Street, and 97 Ontario Street, And further, that after receiving public comments, a staff report be presented to council for consideration at a subsequent council meeting. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion is carried. I have a motion, don't leave yet, Councillor Tadman, give me 10 seconds. I have a motion moved by Councillor Tadman, second by Councillor Bateman, that council move out of the statutory public meeting, July 20th, 2022 at 7:46 PM. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. You're just the mover on that one. That's why I needed you in the room. Councillor Tadman has left the chamber at 7:46 PM. That brings us to planning and development reports. We have one report this evening with regard to pre-servicing agreement of Butler Creek draft approved plan of subdivision. The applicant is 2020910 Ontario Limited. Director Walsh, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Nothing further, Mayor.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that council receive the staff report dated July 20th, 2022, pertaining to the municipality entering into a pre-servicing agreement with 2020910 Ontario Limited, and the council receive and accept the pre-servicing agreement and direct staff to provide a copy of the agreement for the applicant's signature, and that staff be authorized to make necessary design revisions as may arise in final review of drawings as may be necessary through final municipal engineering review, and that council enact the required bylaw authorizing the mayor and the clerk to sign the pre-servicing agreement on behalf of the municipality of Brighton, coming into effect on the date of these signatures. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Councillor Anderson or Bateman, would you please retrieve Councillor Tadman? She'll be disappointed that it didn't take very long. She won't even have it lit. Councillor Tadman has returned to chambers at 7:49 PM, which brings us to unfinished business. There is nothing listed under unfinished business on tonight's agenda, bringing us to bylaws. Our first bylaw is a zoning amendment for Scriver Road, moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading. Finally passes on this date, being a bylaw under the provisions of Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to amend bylaw number 140, 2002, as otherwise amended of the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton as it applies to the lands located at 433 Scriver Road, described as part of Lot 28, Concession 1, as in CL 49612, except 38R 866 and Parts 1 and 2 on Registered Plan 39R 11224. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Second bylaw is with regard to a development agreement for Scriver Road, moved by Councillor Tadman, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute a development agreement between the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton and Gregory Politica? Gregory Politica, Natalie Politica, Mark Alexander Lashik, Marusha Ann Lashik, Helga Maria Mayer, for for the property located at 433 Scriver Road, legally described as part of Lot 28, Concession 1, as CL 49612, except 38R, 866, and Parts 1 and 2 on Registrable Plan 39R 1124, Municipality of Brighton, as in accordance with subsection 51, sub 26 of the Planning Act RSO 1990, Chapter P13. Is there any discussion? Just my apologies to anyone listening to the recording about the pronunciation of your last names. All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Right, so 8.3 and 8.4 are deferred along with the information that we saw in the statutory public meeting. And we'll see those on August 24th. Brings us to the pre-servicing agreement for Butler Creek Condos, moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Tadman, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute a pre-servicing agreement between the corporation of the municipality of Brighton and 2020910 Ontario Limited regarding a plan of subdivision on a property located in Part 1, Plan 39R 12620, being part of Lot 1, Concession 1, in the municipality of Brighton in the county of Northumberland. Is there any discussion? And just for the mover and seconders information, the words "in the municipality of Brighton" were written twice, so I have stricken the second writing of it. Anything further? All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion's carried. That brings us to question period, but there's no one in the room and there's no one on Zoom, so I'm moving on. Does anyone need a break, or can we just pile through? Yeah, let me just read the motion and then we can do that. So it's moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Councillor Rowley. The council resolve itself into closed session July 20th, 2022 at 7:53 p.m. pursuant to the Ontario Municipal Act RSO 2001 as amended, subsection 239(2)C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality of Brighton or local board surplus lands for affordable housing. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried.